All right, I'm going to call to order the regular session of the City Council meeting of the City of Atascadero, and I would like to ask Mayor Pro Tem Newsom to lead us in a pledge to the flag.
Please join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dog always has something to say about it. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Borbo?
Here.
Councilmember Daris?
Here.
Councilmember Funk?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom?
Here.
Mayor Moreno?
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Well, if you're watching or listening to tonight's City Council meeting, we welcome you. If you would like to speak during the time set aside for community forum or for public comment on any of the agenda items, you can do it in a few ways. Number one, if you're on the webinar tonight, you can simply go to the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen, and we will call on you. You can also, if you're watching or listening, you can call into 805-538-2888. And that is another way. When you do call, make sure you let us know whether it's community forum or which item it is that you would like to speak on. Once again, that number is 805-538-2888. May I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Funk and a second by Councilmember Borbo. We will waive the reading in full of all ordinances that are appearing on this agenda, and the titles of the ordinances will be read aloud by the city clerk at the first reading after the motion and before the council votes. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Funk?
Yes.
Councilmember Borbo?
Yes.
Councilmember Daris?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom?
Yes.
Mayor Moreno?
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And now I'd like to ask our city attorney, Mr. Brian Pierrick, if we have any reportable action from our closed session on January 11th.
We do not have any reportable action.
I thought that there was. I must be. I will bow to you.
I think you're relying on the last council meeting, if I'm correct, with respect to the initiation of litigation. But I don't believe we had any reportable action from the January 11th meeting.
Okay. If that changes during the context or the time of our meeting, we can mention that later. But I will bow to you. You would know. All right. Thank you.
I would hope so.
Yes. All right. We have no presentations this evening. We'll move on to our consent calendar. And consent calendar items are considered to be routine and non-controversial by city staff and can generally be approved in one motion if there's no member of the council or the public that's wishing to pull an item. So I'll look to my council members, see if there's anyone wishing to pull an item. Seeing none, I will go to the public. And if you're on the phone, you can press *9. If you are on the webinar, you can raise your hand if there's anyone wanting to pull or comment on a consent calendar item. Luke, do we have anyone on the phone?
We do not.
All right, thank you. So seeing none, I'll close public comment, bring it back to council and ask for a motion.
Move approval of the consent calendar.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Borbo, second by Councilmember Funk. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Borbo?
Yes.
Councilmember Funk?
Yes.
Councilmember Daris?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom?
Yes.
Mayor Moreno?
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We are on to updates from our city manager. Ms. Rickard.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Everybody can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Want to talk about one of all of our favorite days of the year. We had our 6th annual Tamale Festival on January 15th, and we had thousands of visitors coming into town to enjoy the event and the tasty tamales of all kinds. The festival always includes a best tamale contest, a tamale eating contest, a Chihuahua costume contest, and with the winners and top placing contestants in each category going home with some great bragging rights and beautiful trophies. The event this time ended with a crowd-pleasing fireworks display. And as always, we want to thank all of our generous sponsors who make these types of great events possible. along with our tamale tasting judges, the amazing vendors who traveled here from throughout California, and to all of the local breweries, wineries, and cineries who participated in the event this year. We're already looking forward to next year, so mark your calendars for January 14th, 2023 for the 7th annual Atascadero Tamale Festival. I have to admit, I tried a few different tamales and then I bought some from a tamale other. I have not found a tamale I didn't like yet, unfortunately. So it was absolutely a wonderful day. The rain didn't seem to slow anybody down. The folklorica dancers were dancing out there in the rain, giving it their all, and it was just a wonderful event. Speaking of wonderful events, we are going to have a couple of wonderful events this Friday, January 28th. We'll be holding a City Council Special Economic Development Workshop from 1 to 5 p.m. We're going to be discussing various economic development programs, including downtown infrastructure enhancement, broadband grants or loan programs, and potential use of ARPA funding for these programs. And then also this Friday, beginning at 6 p.m., we'll hold a special joint meeting of the City Council and Planning Commission for a general plan scoping session to review and discuss the general plan update process. Both sessions will be heard virtually, and the public is highly encouraged to join and participate. These are study sessions, a little bit more informal, lots of opportunity for the council and planning commissioners to really dive into topics and discuss them and get that that public input on these items. So please join us. You don't have to show up for all of it or both. You can show up for one if you're just interested in the general plan scoping or economic development scoping, study session, but please join us. We also have the father-daughter dance coming up. Again, it's nice to have that back. So we're inviting all dads and granddads to bring their special girl to our annual father-daughter sweetheart dance at the Pavilion on the Lake for an evening of music, dancing, refreshments, and more. The event will be held on 2 nights, Friday, February 4th and Saturday, February 5th. Friday evening will be from 6:30 to 9:30 p.m. and is intended for girls 12 and under. And then Saturday will be from 7 to 10 p.m. and is intended for girls over age 12. Tickets for either evening can be purchased in person at the Colony Park Community Center on Traffic Way, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. For more information, call 805-470-3360 or go to visitatascadero.com. Want to also let you know about some helicopter activity we'll be having in the area soon. So during the week of February 7th, weather permitting, Southern California Gas will be working with a helicopter company to map any methane emissions over their gas lines and infrastructure located in the city of Atascadero and the surrounding unincorporated areas of northern San Luis Obispo County. The technology allows them to detect methane emissions from the air at a 500-foot altitude. The flights will take place between 8 and 5 p.m. and the helicopter will be flying back and forth in a lawnmower pattern. So they'll be going back, turn around, come back. Detection of methane emissions is one way that's being utilized to help keep communities safe and is part of the SB 1371 emissions reduction program. These flights are part of a larger program to detect any emissions throughout all areas served by SoCal Gas. And if anyone has any questions about the helicopter activity, they can call the SoCal Gas Customer Service Contact Center at 1-800-427-2200. And another local favorite event, it is our Earthshine Creek Cleanup event, and that is coming on February 12th. We are looking for volunteers. Earthshine is a local volunteer group that works to help keep our Central Coast communities looking beautiful. They are returning to Atascadero on Saturday, February 12th from 9 a.m. to noon for another Atascadero Creek Cleanup event. Earthshine meets the second Saturday of every month in Central Coast community to pick up litter, trash, and more from streets, creeks, beaches, and trails. For more information about the organization and their ongoing community cleanup events can be found on their website at www.earthshineorg.com. And Atascadero volunteers are welcome and encouraged to come and join in the effort on Saturday, the 12th. You meet at the Sunken Gardens at 9 a.m. They will provide bags, dumpsters, whatever you need. Certainly come prepared to tramp through the creek and into areas where shoes that are conducive to that. But it's for 3 hours, it makes such a difference when we all pull together. It's a wonderful event, and we appreciate Earthshine coming here to Atascadero to do that. With that, I'd be happy to answer any council questions.
Thank you, Ms. Rickard. That Earthshine event is fantastic. And I know myself and several of my colleagues, I know Councilmember Funk, Councilmember Bourbeau, I've seen both of you out there. And then there have also been other events, and we so appreciate them. And you're right, that 2 hour, that 10 to noon, it's incredible what is picked up. And so we really appreciate all the public that comes out to do that, and Earthshine for pulling this together. And I do want to thank our staff for the great job that we're doing on events. I'm hearing from so many people that the wonderful outdoor events that we've continued to hold from back during the Fall Festival, Winter Wonderland, of course, Tamale Festival, our residents, and I know even visitors throughout the county are really appreciating being able to come to those. So many thanks to staff who do such a good job to put on just top quality events. We appreciate that. I would ask if there are any questions of City Manager. I am not seeing any, so wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now we will move on to Community Forum. This is the portion of our meeting that is reserved for persons wanting to address the council on a matter that's not on the agenda this evening, but over which the council has jurisdiction. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and we ask that you would state your name for the record before making your presentation. Comments made during Community Forum will not be a subject of discussion this evening. A maximum of 30 minutes will be allowed, and any member of the public who has questions or needs information can always contact the City Clerk's office during business hours from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. at 470-3400 or cityclerk@atascadero.org. So with that, I will open up Community Forum, and anyone on the webinar, you can raise your hand. And if there's any callers, you can press *9. And if you haven't called in yet, you can call 805-538-2888. And Community Forum is open. Don't be shy, folks. Luke, do we have any callers right now?
We do not.
Do not. All right, I'm not seeing anyone. So if you want to speak, please do raise your hand, or we will be closing Community Forum. Going once, twice. All right. We will close the Community Forum and bring it back to council. We certainly hope to see any of you who are watching this evening. Tell your friends we do want to see you on Friday for our economic development session and our general plan scoping. Great time for us to come together, kind of like we did last year in so many meetings leading up to the budget and looking through D20. So always appreciate your input and all of us working together as a community to plan our future. So with that, Community Forum, since we have no one wishing to speak at this time, will remain open until 6:43 p.m. And so if somebody would like to speak, you can raise your hand or press *9, let us know, and we will recognize you at the earliest possible convenience, likely when we're through the next item. So with that, we will move on to B1, which is a public hearing for the ratification of an approval of a hazardous tree removal. And this item we received, staff let us know that we received word from the property owner that they would like to continue this item until February 22nd of 2022. And so we are going to do that. But what we'd like to do, of course, because we have noticed it, we want to go ahead and open up to public comment on this item. So if there's any public comment, go ahead and raise your hand or press *9 if you're on the phone. I'm seeing none. And Mr. Dunsmore, if you would like to say something, you can. Otherwise, I think we're good.
I think you've got it covered. And for all those who are watching, I didn't get a spray tan. I think this is an orange light that kind of give me this look. Does it look orange to you as it does to me?
Sure, Phil.
No, thank you. I think we're good on that.
All right.
You look jaundiced.
Thank you. All right, so we will keep public comment open and continue this item to the February 22nd meeting. But just because we have not noticed that we were continuing it, I would like to have a motion on the continuance. So let's go ahead and do that.
I move we continue this item to the February 22nd meeting.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Bourbeau and a second by Vice Mayor. I'm going to call Vice Mayor. I'm making a new word. Vice Mayor Newsom. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bourbeau,
Yes.
Councilmember Daris,
Yes.
Councilmember Funk,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Newsom,
Yes.
and Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. We will move on to our management report. We have one this evening, and this is our fiscal year 2020-2021 audit. And we will look to our Administrative Services Director, Ms. Jerry Rangel.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Let me pull it up here. All right. Thank you very much. So I'm very excited to bring to you tonight the 2020-21 financial statements, audited financial statements report. The independent firm of Moss, Levy, and Hartzheim was hired to perform the audit work. Mr. Adam Geis, a partner with the firm, is available tonight to address any questions that you may have for them. The audit was conducted in accordance with the auditing standards generally accepted in the United States and standards applicable to financial audits contained in government auditing standards. The auditors issued an unqualified opinion, or what we call a clean opinion, meaning that the auditors agreed the financial statements were presented fairly and in compliance with accounting principles. The city's financial performance was positive overall, and the general fund was better than estimated in the 7-year projection that was updated and adopted in June of 2021. Tonight's focus will be on the general fund. Fiscal year 2021 was another unusual year. COVID effects were not as pronounced as they were in the prior year, but still had an impact. Some positive one-time and ongoing revenues were able to offset much of the COVID impact, ultimately enhancing the bottom line, along with some operational cost savings. There was a one-time extraordinary loss due to the write-up of the redevelopment loans. These were those loans that the city had loaned to the former redevelopment agency quite a ways back. The total of these loans was $1,375,175. Through the dissolution of redevelopment, these loans ultimately became uncollectible and were written off during the fiscal year. Given the overall circumstances, the city performed well during the year. The audited financial statements include the sales tax measure D20 and F14 activity in the general fund as required for legal and accounting purposes. They will be broken out in the discussion tonight. Future years' discussions will include measure D20 along with other general fund activity. This table shows general fund activity excluding both of those tax measures. At the start of the fiscal year, and in accordance with the council's long-term financial policies, the adopted budget anticipated the use of $450,500 in general fund reserves. That's adjusted here in this table for encumbrances. The year concluded with a net change in fund balance of about $237,000. That's a positive variance of about $810,000. The revenue variance during the year was due to a number of factors. The largest includes sales tax, intergovernmental revenues, mutual aid, and permit and development revenues. Worth noting is the zoo revenue. Admissions, education, gift shop, and special events, these were up about 63% over budget, and that's about $265,000. This very steep increase is likely due to some of the COVID impacts, having some place to go when other places are closed maybe. And it's certainly great news, but it's probably not a upward trend going forward that steep. The general fund expenditures were about 23.7 million. Employee services were less than expected due to some unfilled vacancies. There were also some operational cost savings during the year. Special purchases and capital outlay were higher than originally budgeted. Some of the items here include things like the Emergency Small Business Micro Grant Program, the assistance to the Chamber's Bridge Works program, and grants that have offsetting revenue to accompany the additional expenditures. This is the first fiscal year with Measure D20 activity. The Measure D20 revenue from April through June of 2021 was about 1.4 million. Expenses were about 808. Measure F14 revenue was about 2.8 million, with expenditures coming in about 2.6. The balance in the F14 column are funds that are being used on current and future road projects. Total general fund ending balance, including both of the tax measures, as reported in the financial statements, was 17.3 million. Excluding the Measure F14 funds, however, general fund reserves ended the year about 12.8 million. As stated, as a percentage of general fund expenditures, reserves are about 52% for the fiscal year. This is in compliance with council's policy. The city is a member of CalPERS and offers retirement benefits to its employees. The city's CalPERS retirement plans are grouped with other similar agencies into what we call pools. The city's net pension liability is affected not only by city-specific factors, but also by the activity in those pools. At the end of the year, the city's net pension liability was about 30.6 million. This is an increase of roughly 2 million over the prior year, but the largest part of this increase was the risk pool's asset loss in 2020. Assets earned 4.7% instead of 7.15% that was expected. You may recall too that CalPERS had some additional higher than expected return in fiscal year 21 of 21%. But those will be counted in future years. So that triggered a discount rate reduction down to 6.8, and those will be effective for our reporting purposes in fiscal year 23-24. And that concludes staff report, and I would be happy to answer any questions along with Adam Geis, who's here from the auditing firm.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rangel. Every year, this is something that we do. So if you've been around for some time, you've seen that. These are our audited financial statements. I love this year, Jerry, by the way, that they are in letter size and not the legal size that's like so unwieldy. So this is very nice. And so what we're looking at, you can probably tell, is the after the fact. Sort of like our last meeting, we're looking at the roads and kind of reporting on what has happened. And so that's the same thing that this audit is looking at what happened in our prior fiscal year ending in 2021. And this will be made available to you, Ms. Rangel, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably by tomorrow morning, there will be a link on the website to this audited report with all of the financial statements.
Absolutely.
Okay. So any member of the public, I greatly encourage you, just like I do with the budget. I think the budget is actually more interesting. The audit, you can get a little bit confusing because you have citywide financial statements, you have, governmental, just the fund accounting, you've got all sorts of different accounts. And unless you really understand governmental accounting, which nobody does but Jerry and Rochelle, it can be quite challenging to read through it, but feel free to do that. And any questions you ever have, always reach out to us. I would love to maybe first bring on our city treasurer, Jerry Seebach. I know Jerry's around, and I would appreciate maybe your insight on the audit report and being our treasurer.
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I don't have much to say. It's all the good work of your other staff. I am a tiny blip on the radar screen of the accounting. But the investment what I will deal with mostly is starting to turn up a little. As interest rates rise, and we've found some other different vehicles to invest in. But it is very comforting to know that they're having a clean opinion from the audit firm, and they're also working very efficiently. They are shorthanded in the admin services department, as you may know. So I commend them very much, and the rest of the other departments also support this whole thing. It's a citywide effort to get this budget and the financials done.
Thank you, Mr. Seebach. It is indeed a citywide effort, and administrative services has been understaffed for a while. You guys do a tremendous job, and we thank you for that. So I will go on to any council questions, see if we've got council questions regarding the audit report, which this is just a receive and file, by the way, for public's information. Councilmember Funk.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And first, I'd like to congratulate Jerry and Rochelle and all the staff on a clean audit report on financial statements that have covered a very confusing time period in terms of all the things that have happened. And you carried through and then gave clean numbers. And the auditor has attested that these are a clean statement of what actually happened. And we appreciate that level of clarity for the public. Couple of short questions. First, a minor point. On page 20 of the financial statements, in looking at revenues, there's a line item of charges for services of $1.676 million for public safety. And I just wanted to get clarification on that to make sure that people don't know, don't assume that we're charging constituents millions of dollars to have local services. Am I correct in understanding that these are services, largely speaking, that our fire department and police department mostly provide to other jurisdictions when there are fires and disasters elsewhere?
You're absolutely right. Yes, the bulk of that number is from mutual aid revenues, which does have an offsetting expense piece other places in the budget, right?
Okay, thank you. And then, of course, I'm going to ask about that $1.375 million in redevelopment loans, because there's another piece to that story, right? Yeah, in this time frame, we took the write-off, but we took that write-off, as I recall, and correct me if I am wrong, after we have worked extensively with Senator Laird to find a way for the city to get set right for that, and to get an equitable solution from the state. And it turned out that after he carried the legislation to all the committees where it usually goes to die and gotten it through, that he then found it would be most expeditious to instead put a line item in the budget. So am I correct in understanding that we are expecting, as of an approval of the state budget, a $3 million payment from the state that will make that $1.375 million write-off not so tough, but that we have not yet received the money? Is that correct?
That is correct, and we're very grateful for that funding.
We are very grateful to Senator Laird and to everybody in the staff. I know you and Rochelle worked hard with the mayor and myself and others to do all of the work that it took to help everyone understand the issue, and that it was a matter of not doing something special for our community, but getting us the same kind of fair deal that other cities got, despite a couple technicalities. So, thank you.
Thank you. And yes, thank you for pointing that out. Let's see, any other council questions? Councilmember Bourbeau.
Yeah, lucky for you, I had numerous questions that I asked the city manager this morning, but something cropped up on page 132. I noticed, and I didn't ask this question. It involves, we have a balance in the library expansion facilities fee fund. And obviously the library expansion, the big one, took place. And so I'm asking if you could explain what that, the balance of that fund is intended for. If, you know, is it going to stay there for some future need, or what is the purpose of that?
Yes, I believe it's pretty flexible in the need for expansion of different book collections or computer equipment, that sort of thing. So we check in with the library and kind of see what their needs are and go from there. At the time that we created this current 2-year budget that we're in, we didn't connect on where those needed to be. So we'll continue to keep touch with them and see if we can get this money spent for the good of the community.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from council? Seeing none, I will go ahead and open up public comment. If you are in the webinar, go ahead and press that raise hand button, or if you're on the phone, *9. Any members of the public wishing to speak on the audit or have any questions about it? Luke, do we have any callers?
We do not.
All right. I'm going to say a last chance here. This is going to be a regular thing tonight. Ms. Rangel, I'm still in public comment. Did you want to say something?
Mr. Geis is available too if you wanted him during the public comment or otherwise for a comment.
Okay. I didn't see him on here. Is he as a panelist? There he is. Okay. Yeah. Mr. Geis, is there something that you would like to say? Don't feel like you have to, but if you'd like to comment, feel free.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay. Yeah, Jerry pretty much did a good job of quickly going over the changes from last year. So the only thing I really wanted to point out is that I appreciate all the staff's work in getting everything together for us. We come out to the city at 2 different weeks during the year in order to work on the audit. The first time we kind of concentrate on looking at how the city internal controls and processes work regarding with how it pays its bills, how it pays its employees, how receipts are taken in, and we test those systems. And then the second time we come out, we get all the final numbers and we look at backup documentation and try and verify all those numbers. So it's a lot of documents, a lot of stuff to go through, and they're always very efficient at getting the information to us. And in regard to that, there's 2 little letters that are right at the very end of the staff report. And those letters are where any findings would be included if we had any major recommendations after going through and reviewing all of the controls and processes. And so I just wanted to point out that there are no findings included. We believe that all the city's controls are well set up and they're being followed in order to prevent any kind of misstatements. So
thank you, Mr. Geis. Appreciate that.
Yeah, basically that's all I wanted to add, unless there's any other questions for me.
I'm not seeing any questions. Thank you so much. Our Councilmember Bourbeau, you always kind of do this gradual and I can't quite tell.
Well, I'm not sure when is the appropriate point to let you know, because I did not have a question. I did have a comment I wanted to make though before we receive and file it.
Well, let's hold off on that then, because I need to close public comment. So if you have a question though for Mr. Geis, we'll go ahead and keep that open at the moment. Okay, so Mr. Geis, thank you so much for being here. And I will ask one more time if there's anyone in the public here on the webinar or on the phone wishing to speak during public comment. I am not seeing any, so we'll go ahead and close public comment, bring it back to council and to Councilmember Bourbeau.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to note, make sure everybody sees on page 98 regarding our net pension liability, that it's always a matter of concern that despite, the city paying everything it is supposed to pay under CalPERS rules, pays a certain amount of payroll. We also pay, and the audit would show over $2 million last year for previously unfunded accrued liability, as it's known. And yet our net pension liability continues to grow. As Jerry noted, it went up about $2 million in the last year. And of course, some of this is behind, as she noted, because it's based on a market valuation of CalPERS assets more than a year ago. But the concern is that it's, gone in the 6-year period listed in the report on that page, on page 98, from $16 million to $30 million. And so it's it's an ongoing item of concern that we as a city do what we're supposed to do, but for a variety of reasons, the net pension liability continues to grow and is now 300% of payroll. And so it's just something I think everybody should be cognizant of.
Yes, we are. And we're doing what we can do. We talk about it every year. And unfortunately, CalPERS has their rules and changes that they make, that we have and investment choices that they make that we as cities, and let alone the holders of the pensions, the pensioners have no say in. So we are sort of at their mercy. With that, I will look if there's any other comments. Otherwise, looking for a motion to receive and accept the audit report.
Also move.
Second.
A motion by Councilmember Bourbeau, a second by Councilmember Funk. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bourbeau,
Yes.
Councilmember Funk,
Yes.
Councilmember Dares,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom,
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. So we're on to our second management report, which is our Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response Grant. It's called a SAFER grant for short. And our Fire Chief, Casey Bryson, will be making the presentation for this item.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity. Can you see my screen?
We can.
Okay, good. That is, after 2 years of doing this, that is still the most troublesome part of the entire thing. So again, thank you for the opportunity. Tonight's management report is the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response Grant, also known as the SAFER grant. As I click through here, so the SAFER grant is a grant program administered by the Department of Homeland Security under the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It is a competitive nationwide grant with the goal to help fire departments improve staffing levels to ensure that they have adequate personnel to respond and safely perform at incident scenes. So Atascadero has applied and received SAFER grants in the past, 2011, most recently in 2018. We have received, well, most recently in 2018, this was a topic at council. We applied for one firefighter. That was also a 3-year program. And the city match at that time, the city paid 25%, 25%, and then 65% of the salary and benefits of that firefighter. After that firefighter helped to fill vacancies, direct response to my first year as fire chief in 2017, we had, I think, 2 long-term injuries, long-term meaning 2 to 4 or 6 months. We had 2 vacancies due to retirements. And I think I had an employee on leave for having a baby. And so we thought, let's come up with some solutions to fill these vacancies. And we chose to do the one SAFER firefighter at that time. After carefully weighing the pros and cons and talking to council, this position ultimately became part of the budget in 2021. And it allowed the fire department to have the battalion chief of operations position at that time. This year, 2022 SAFER grant, it's also a 3-year grant period again, as it was before, but this time there is no local match. So the 3 years would be entirely on the government. So just real briefly on our staffing here in the fire department, we have 18 full-time firefighters on shift. That is 3 shifts of 6 each, A, B, and C, each have 6 firefighters, 3 firefighters at each fire station. So each of those shifts, we split those in half. We have 3 at each station. So we use overtime to cover those shifts in an effort to maintain 6 on duty each day. So we typically have firefighters call in sick. We have firefighters that use vacation, holiday time, go off to training. So when that happens, we use the overtime account in our budget to attempt to maintain 6 on duty at each time. So, and we do a pretty good job. We have gone, over, up and down, depending on the number of injuries per year, but most often we are able to maintain that level of staffing. Last year in 2021, there were about 80-ish shifts that had an engine company with less than 3 full-time on it. However, most of those were in the beginning of the fiscal year, say July, August, September, when we had seasonal staffing on board. So it did result in 2 full-time on the engine, but there was a seasonal on at that time. So we typically rely on that kind of staffing during the summer months and keep that overtime for the winter months in the effort to keep 6 on duty at all times. In the staff report, we did a brief notice of national recommendations of 4 personnel on an engine. And this is in fact where we're at during the summertime. I mentioned the seasonal program. We do our best to keep 4 people on duty. In fact, for the wildland season, we know we have a strong incident of wildland fire, and national standards may gear towards the structure firefighting aspect, but we know firsthand that when we are faced with a wildland fire up a steep hill at Highway 41 looking up towards San Marcos, it does take a 4-person engine to carry hose up that hill and try to mitigate that incident. So more locally, that's our direction for the staffing level. But either way, it's safety driven, both for the community and the fire department. And realize that 4 personnel, like every department, we just mentioned finance, every department here is short and we do more with less. 3 firefighters, regardless, is an efficient, it's a capable, it's a safe engine company. It provides a supervisor, the fire captain, it provides an operator, the engineer, and the firefighter, one of which will always be a paramedic, and oftentimes 2 will be paramedics. And whatever emergency, whether it's a CPR, performing high performance CPR, whether it's another critical medical type call with defibrillation or intubation, or it's a structure fire or wildland fire, the 3-person company does provide a safe, efficient model to mitigate whatever incident we're faced with. It brings us to this year's SAFER grant. We're looking to apply for 3 firefighters. That would be an addition of 1 per shift. And there's a couple reasons we're looking at this number. That would give, if we applied and received this grant, there's no indication that we for sure would receive the 3. But if we did, that would add 1 per shift for a total of 7. And that does not increase necessarily our minimum staffing. We would still maintain the 6. And for a couple of reasons here. The first is basically, I'll use the term to protect the 6 on duty. We mentioned that long-term injuries have affected the fire department. Usually these are back or shoulder injuries. Last year we had a shoulder injury that lasted about 8 months. Currently have a back injury. Also this year, hopefully in 3 years, we will not be dealing with this, but we are dealing with quarantine issues on a regular basis. And then we have vacation time, we have holiday time, training courses such as a paramedic program that typically last over a year. So for all these reasons, adding 1 person, adding that 7th firefighter will allow us to protect the 6 on duty at all times. When 1 firefighter is off for that vacation or that injury, that 7th firefighter will be able to cover the majority of those overtime shifts. So instead of bringing someone on overtime from another shift, that 7th firefighter will be able to cover the majority of those. In most cases, I think 50 to 75% of the time, depending on the capability of the other members on that crew. So this will reduce overtime directly. It will, by not bringing another member over from another shift, it'll reduce the number of hours worked by other members, which will directly lead to lower burnout as we're working lots of shifts and we're heading into a busy fire season. Fewer overtime shifts will have a direct correlation with burnout. And like I mentioned, I think it will reduce the overtime spent significantly. The second reason I'd like to mention, the reason for this grant is potential future growth of the fire department. Atascadero does continue to develop. We've talked about numerous projects in the city. We know we have people moving into Emerald Ridge right now. And as the city grows, our call volume will continue to increase. We had a decrease in 2020, and I think that was in direct response to some of the lockdowns, but we jumped right back up in 2021 with a large increase in call volume. And as our call volume grows, we increase also the occurrence of multiple calls at once. We call these overlapped or stacked calls. And the more often this happens, the more often we do not have another engine available to handle that next call. In 2021, we had about 500-ish calls that occurred while another call was already happening. So about 14% or so of our calls occurred in a stacked or overlapped response where we would not at that point have another engine available to assist when another call comes in. And when this happens, we rely on our partners. We have great relationships with Templeton and more specifically, even the Atascadero State Hospital. We work very well with them and they help us out quite a bit, but everybody's getting busier too. So at some point we will need to address that. Templeton just recently staffed at night, so they are on 24-hour staffing because of their increased call volume. So as we kind of look towards the future, one step that has been done successfully in other fire agencies, some local and throughout the state and even further out, is in lieu of adding another fire station with a 3-person engine company, is starting off with a 2-person squad. And it could be ran out of one of the 2 existing fire stations. A 2-person squad can handle the lower emergent calls, maybe the smoke checks, the trips and falls, fire alarm, minor medical calls. And it can handle the majority of those, keeping those 3-person engine companies in their stations where they are in the best location to respond to those more serious calls. So basically it lessens that impact of relying on our neighbors, and it provides the 3-person engine company more often available to handle the more serious call. And I'm not suggesting that this is something we jump right into. This is one step in that direction. And I think that hiring 3 firefighters would in essence get you halfway towards that squad model. And it's something that in budgets in the future we would be addressing, but not necessarily at this time. It just gets us partway through and helps us start preparing for the future. So the next question is what happens after the grant period? And this is the big question. So there are no requirements placed on the city after the grant. There's no requirement to maintain the staffing levels that you received with the grant or go back to the staffing level you had before. There currently are no identified funds to pay the estimated $530,000 in annual costs. So we have to look at a few decision points here. We have a couple placed up here on the screen. At that point, after the grant is over, we would need to either, the first one I'll read, find and prioritize funding in the city budget to pay for one or more of the firefighters. Now we've gone through the D20 process in the last budget. We know that there are a lot of competing priorities in the city. Limited funding, even with D20 funding, will be limited at the next budget cycle. So we would need to look at those competing priorities and see if it's the right time to pay for one or more of those 3 firefighters. Another option would be to apply for another grant, possibly another SAFER grant. I have not seen much success in SAFER grants being rewarded a second time to maintain those first SAFER positions. So how competitive we would be, I'm not thinking we'd be super competitive at that point. So I don't think we would want to basically hold our hat on applying and receiving another SAFER grant. So that leads us to the third option that we would need to consider, laying off one or more of those firefighters, and that reduces our service level. That goes back to where we are currently. So we would see the benefit of increased service levels for 3 years and then consider moving back to where we were. So those are some of the options we could look at and after the grant period is over. So basically our summary tonight is that the SAFER grant will improve community and fire personnel safety and result in reduced overtime costs. Primarily, it's to keep 6 firefighters on duty at all times. So that's our main mission, to keep those 6 on. In looking at those long-term injuries that we've had, it reduces overtime, but it keeps those 6 on duty. It also is a $1.5 million benefit to the city over the 3 years in those personnel salary and benefits, and it will show a reduction in our overtime. But the grant at the end does not require the city to keep these positions, and there's currently no identified funding to maintain the positions when the grant expires. So that's what we need to look at. So staff is recommending that we go ahead and apply for this grant. It's due in the next 2 weeks. That council authorized the application for the grant, and if awarded, that receiving the SAFER grant to reimburse the city for adding 3 new firefighter positions for 3 years. That is the summary recommendation, and after that, I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Chief Bryson. I will look to council for any questions for our chief. Councilmember Borbeau.
Thank you. Thank you. I was waiting to see if anybody else had any questions. Chief, is it possible that you could be awarded the grant for less than the 3? And is it awarded in sense of 1, 2, or 3, or is it awarded in terms of a dollar amount?
It is awarded in the number that you ask for. There are other larger fire departments. I heard Fresno City took 42, was awarded 42 positions. So it's based on your need and your application and how you, basically showing your need for those staffing levels. And in some cases, it's those NFPA numbers that I mentioned at the very beginning. So in this case, we're choosing to apply for 3, that's 1 per shift. And if you are awarded a certain number, there is still an acceptance period. So you, in fact, at that point, you could say, okay, we were awarded 3, we could take on 1 or 2 or none at that point.
Okay. But I mean, I'm wondering in a sense of could, you ask for 3, could they come back and go, well, you can have 1, or you could have 2?
I think that's a possibility. Yeah, they do look at your need and what you're asking for. That has happened in some of their other grant programs with equipment. We've been successful in other assistance to firefighters grants. And at one point we asked for, I think, SCBAs years ago. And they said, well, how about this amount of money? So there is in other grants a form of negotiation. So I don't know for sure if they would do that with the SAFER, but it's a direct possibility.
Got it. And, if they award, say 3, yes, you can have grant funding for 3 firefighters. You indicated, this is worth about $1.5 million over 3 years. And I think you said at the end of that, it would take up to $580,000 of budgeted funds to keep the 3 on board. So that's about $175 per. Do they limit the dollar amount per person, or are they just paying for base salary? Because that's more than we pay with base salary and base benefits, I think. But people get overtime, that sort of thing. Cost goes up. How is that calculated?
They look at what you're paying for that step A or step B or step C firefighter. The numbers that we put in there, I believe, are the projected firefighter costs over the next 3 years. So we looked out a few years to get that projections, actually the life of probably the MOU where raises are already calculated. So that is the salary and benefits of a 3rd-year firefighter in 3 years, basically.
Okay, gotcha. So that would not incorporate any overtime for those personnel then?
Correct. Overtime would not be included.
Got it. Okay, because that's a little higher than I thought as average cost. And are there any other, grants sometimes come with strange strings attached and strange requirements? Are there any other additional requirements that you have to do with these additional personnel if you get them?
No, there are requirements of maintaining your staffing levels during the life of the grant. So they want to make sure that those 18 firefighters we have right now are all still here. And if you do have someone retire or move on to another agency, that you make good progress in replacing them in a timely manner. So really, that's really the only requirement this time that I see in the SAFER grant.
Got it. Sounds like a hell of a deal. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Darres, followed by Councilmember Funk.
Mayor, Chief, I wanted to ask about the overtime savings that you're saying that this would help out with, and I'm wondering how it would balance out if, if we're paying roughly $350,000 a year in overtime expenditures, that's what's budgeted roughly. And then having somebody on that's going to reduce that, how much of a wash would there be? When it comes time, in the 3 years, it's going to be difficult to lay people off, but would that savings essentially cover that salary by keeping somebody on, bringing the overtime costs down?
Right. So if we're looking at $345,000 to $350,000 a year in our overtime budget, roughly 80% of that goes directly to shift coverage. The other 20% goes to training and meetings, FLSA stuff, other things that come out of that overtime budget. I think that seventh firefighter, we've gone back a year and looked at when anyone on shift takes a day off or is missing for whatever reason. We have, a certain number of paramedics, a certain number of qualified engineers that can step up to the position of fire captain, work in that role, and a certain number of firefighters that can work in the position of engineer. So with the capabilities on that crew, adding one person, even though it's a probationary firefighter, we're probably at about 50 to 75% of that amount of shift coverage could be potentially a savings. Now that, it depends on the capability of the crew and some other factors, but that could be $150,000 savings in the overtime, from the overtime budget, more, maybe a little bit more than that. So that's not necessarily the savings for one entire firefighter. It would get you partway there.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Funk.
Yes. Coming back to what happens at the end of this grant, you mentioned that we might be in a position, that if if the budget isn't there to be able to add the extra $530,000 that these three positions would cost, and we can't get more grant funding, that we might end up laying off of these firefighters. But what about if we're getting towards the end of this grant and we have open positions in the department through layoffs or through retirements and turnover? Would the people who we hire in these grant positions be able to fill those positions so that we're not necessarily laying off those specific firefighters?
Yes, absolutely. We would keep those people. And this happened with our 2018 SAFER position. It actually, we had a couple retirements, maybe even 3 or so. And I think every time that happened, the SAFER firefighter moved into we'll call it the secured firefighter full-time position with the city. And we hired a new SAFER firefighter. So we'd bring on a new one, even though maybe there was 2 years left in the grant, and tell them, okay, you are now the SAFER firefighter. And the previous one now has the permanent position. And then we had another retirement, and it kind of kept bumping up until we finished out the grant. So yeah, we would always keep that person if there was an opening.
Okay. And then you mentioned that the addition of these firefighters would have two benefits. One of them was the savings in overtime costs that you and Councilmember Darres quantified. But the other is that you would see increased service levels. Can you talk about what performance metrics you plan to use to demonstrate the impact of these positions on service levels, so that at the end of this grant period, we have some data to work with and understanding what the service level impact is if, versus other competing uses of that $530,000, because that's a big chunk, a budget chunk to
Yeah,
commit.
absolutely. I think there's the first performance measure that stands out to me is looking at how often that seventh person maintains a 4-person engine company, and the capabilities between a 4-person and a 3-person engine company are fairly significant. And those kind of go to those NFPA numbers where they calculate how fast a 4-person engine company can get in, make a rescue, or put out a fire in a structure fire. So I think understanding how often we increase capabilities, keeping track of staffing levels every day, which we do currently, and being able to show at the end of this, we had an increased capability of the 3-person versus the 4-person for a set number of days. And the benefit there is measurable in the amount of time savings and potentially life savings at the structure fire. That would be the one big one I would think. I think a second metric would be dollar savings to the city in the overtime category. But I think the big one is, I think we can quantify that capability that person will increase productivity on that engine.
Okay, I guess I'm a little confused now because as in your presentation, I saw the indication that the intent of this position is to always maintain that 3-level, that 6-person staffing on the shift, which would be 3 levels per engine company. So is that the objective, or is the objective really to add more shifts where we can have 4 people?
You are correct. That initial benefit is to maintain that 3-person engine company at all times. So that's really the main benefit of what we're going for. And we can calculate that and show that as a metric that is what we were able to do at the end of the grant. I was mentioning the 4-person because there will be some times, there will be quite a bit of time where one engine company is staffed at 4, whether it's through the seasonal or this new safer firefighter. And I think I was trying to get to that we could calculate that increased capabilities when we're at that level.
Yeah. Are there any performance metrics that you could do, that you might consider that would be more meaningful to the public? They want our fire department to be able to respond quickly when they have a problem. Can we measure the speed with which the fire department is able to respond? Notably in these situations where you have, as you mentioned, stacked calls. If we've got to go call out to somebody from, the hospital might be able to respond, the ASH team might be able to respond pretty quickly. But if we have to go to Templeton or Paso or Morro Bay or SLO to get somebody to respond, that's going to take more time. And we should be able to see that in average response time numbers. And if we don't have those stacked calls and we can respond locally, we ought to see that come down, right?
Absolutely. And that really will be future growth, right? So we're talking about three people adding through this grant doesn't necessarily get us to that response model yet. So it's getting us partway there. So when we start talking about reducing response times, that's when we add a new piece of equipment. That's that 2-person squad. That will definitely reduce response times at that point, because that 2-person squad can be out in the field handling those low emergencies, the smoke checks and those types of things. And it keeps the engines in place to the best location in town to handle that next call. So response times will be measured. They will come down and be measured at some point in the future. Adding the 3 is more of a safety for the engine companies, protecting the 6 on duty, as opposed to increasing units in the field in order to reduce response times.
I think that the issue at hand, so I get where Councilmember Funk is coming from, like to have a measurable, and we're a little challenged to have that right now. The one main measurable is the overtime. The other measurable is, as the chief said, something that'll happen in the future. And at that 3-year mark, council's going to have to, make a decision about moving forward and what that investment will look like if those funds are available. Is it that 2-person squad? What have we had measurable? And this is probably a good thing for the chief to be thinking about, is what measurables can we look at that will be meaningful, not just to council, but to the public moving forward. But I think what you're saying, chief, is that response time, something like that, isn't in the next 3 years. That's something, once we get that, let's say it's the 2-person squad is the next thing we do, then you can really start to measure like the reduction in stacked calls and increase in response time.
Absolutely. That's well said.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would second that and thank the mayor for the clarification. Yes, indeed, what I'm looking for is the most useful and compelling performance measures that we can have, so that when the council, this comes back to council at the end of the grant, assuming we get the grant, and we're weighing against, we had a really long list of what priorities that people had for the community, and that our key departments had in seeing how to serve the public well. And we have to weigh, all of them against each other. And so we want to be able to really understand what this does for the public, so that we can make a good and responsive decision at that point. So I would encourage you, as this goes forward, to think about what that case is, because you have the unique opportunity with this question to measure the impact of having the spending that you would be then requesting that we continue. Whereas other departments are just saying, well, if you give us this, then this is what we expect. You can prove this is what we got.
Right.
And so I encourage you to track the data that will help the council make that choice, because it will be competitive in all likelihood at the end of 3 years, given how many pressing priorities there are financially for our city.
Yes, absolutely.
Any other council questions? All right, seeing none, we will open to public comment. If you're in the webinar, go ahead and raise your hand, or if you're on the phone, *9. Anyone wishing to comment or ask questions with regards to this SAFER grant? Luke, do we have anyone on the phone that is wishing to speak?
We do not.
All right. Anyone else? I do see Mr. Pierrick in there, Dean, but Persick, but you probably figure the chief has covered everything, but I wanted to give you that option. I don't mean to call you out, but if you want to say something, feel free. Any other members of the public? I'm seeing nobody. So going once, going twice. All right, we'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to council for deliberation. I think the sense I'm getting from all of us is that this is something that we would like to move forward with, and to, make sure, as Councilmember Funk explained, that, looking at the possibility of what can be measured, so that it's not just meaningful. I mean, and we all get this, we're all in our own industries, and we know, like, this is what's meaningful to us. And so I know, just like Nick DeBar can geek out on engineering stuff, I'm sure there's plenty of fire stuff for you to geek out on, Chief. And, what we're asking is that you're able to kind of look at, okay, what would really make sense to the community? Could they understand, and what this would be delivering for them? So just kind of be thinking about that. Any other conversation we need to have? Councilmember Borbeau, I think I saw you perk up there.
I just want to say, I think this is a great job on a part of them to search out and find these grants, because to me, this is just an outstanding deal. Even in the worst case scenario, at the end of 3 years, if we couldn't afford it for some reason, we've gotten 3 years of additional firefighters, a reduction in overtime costs. So this is a win-win-win as far as I'm concerned. And with that, I'd make the motion that we approve staff's recommendation and authorize the application for the SAFER grant as indicated.
I'll go ahead and second.
All right, we've got a motion by Councilmember Borbo and a second by Mayor Pro Tem Newsom. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Borbo,
Yes.
Councilmember Daris,
Yes.
Councilmember Funk,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom,
Yes, and thank you,
Mayor
Chief.
Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, we are on to council announcements and committee reports. And so I will just go on the screen here and start with Councilmember Funk.
Okay, it's a busy time. We've got on Thursday, Mayor Pro Tem Newsom and I have a design review committee where we will be looking at, let me grab the agenda here, the design and neighborhood compatibility review of a new tool rental center addition to the Home Depot, and design and neighborhood compatibility and review of a new landscape material sale and equipment rental use at 6501 Via Avenue. And that will be Thursday at 2 o'clock by Zoom. Thursday morning, I have a meeting that I chair of the steering committee for the 0 to 10 year plan to address homelessness countywide. And then Friday, of course, as the mayor noted, we have 2 meetings for the council. And that's already been covered. And then last week, the Atascadero Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency approved the submission of the Atascadero Basin Groundwater Sustainability Plan.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. I'm gonna get it right one of these days. It just trips off the tongue. But so that was an important victory for our basin, which is in good shape, and we want to keep it in good shape. And that will the intent is to have the paperwork and all of the little fine details go to the state by the end of the month. It will take some time for the state to finish its review process. In the meantime, there will be regular reporting on how things are going with the agents, with the basin. That's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Borbo.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. In the Integrated Waste Management Authority, or IWMA, the board did hire as an interim executive director, Mr. Pavel Ogren. We actually rehired him. And that's the hiring of a interim executive director, something that all the cities have been asking for, or at least via their city managers and via their resolutions had requested that. Also, we're beginning the process. We had hired Ms. Avery and Associates to conduct an executive search for a permanent executive director, and that has begun. He has begun interviewing board members regarding their desires in a future executive director. And continue to have, we'll make progress on the Joint Powers Agreement amendment, and hopefully progress on the new rate for the IWMA fee that is imposed on haulers. Working on that with the cities, and now that Mr. Ogren is on board, hopefully that will go smoothly, because that is the most critical thing facing the IWMA, is to raise some additional revenue to cover the cost of implementing SB 1383. So I think that's that for the IWMA. I did attend a Water Resources Advisory Committee meeting, but nothing of note to report there. Also, I'm now the vice chair of the Revenue and Taxation Committee for League of Cities, and we'll be having a meeting next week. And one of the things that's come up, and I've advised the city manager, is that she had served as a member of a committee to review the allocation of sales taxes, especially for the sales taxes that come from distribution warehouses, your Amazon type distribution centers. With right now, most of that revenue, of course, going to the cities where that is located, despite the fact that customers are, in all the other cities. She had served on a committee as part of that, and that committee is probably coming back to life. And that's one of the things we'll be discussing at the Revenue and Taxation Committee meeting.
Glad you're part of that. Councilmember Daris.
Thank you, Mayor. Tomorrow I have the Air Pollution Control District is meeting tomorrow at 9 o'clock. I'll report on what the outcome of that is at the next council meeting. But other than that and our meeting on Friday, that's all I have to report.
Thank you. And Vice Mayor Newsom.
I always like the changing titles. It's always fun. As my council member Susan Funk colleague had discussed, we have DRC meeting on Thursday and nothing else to report.
Thank you. I had a mayor's meeting last week. Nothing of note to report. We have a city selection committee coming up this Friday for an appointment to LAFCO, which needs to be an elected city council member appointment. And let's see what else. I have RTA coming up next Wednesday, Regional Transit Authority, and this is the big item. Really has to do with roundabouts on 227, and there's a decent number of neighbors in that area that are very concerned from safety wise to slowing down and creating even more problems with it. And yet on the other side, we've got to relieve some congestion in that area and also on 101. So we're going to be looking at that a little more in depth, and I anticipate quite a bit of public input on that. Also, which we will be discussing this Friday at our economic development portion of our meeting, broadband, but we've kind of started to pull together a North County group to be talking about, more of a regional piece of broadband, because there's no, as a city, we can't at our size just go it on our own and try to get the money that's available. And there's a lot of funding available for broadband because it's a really important, we're looking at it as a fourth utility now. And so we want to see regionally, minimally as North County. And if other cities in the county want to be coming on board, but we really want to look at moving forward with this in a deliberate, purposeful way, and not just waiting around for others to get going, which could be years down the line. And so we're going to be having this conversation Friday. Paso is going to be talking about it very soon, and we really want to look at what does it take to move forward together. So looking forward to that conversation. And with that, I will move on to ask if we have any individual determinations or actions. All right, seeing none, I will recess our regular meeting to go to closed session. So if anyone would like to speak on a closed session item, the city attorney is going to announce in just one moment. You can, of course, raise your hand, or if you're on the phone, or you can call in if you haven't already to 805-538-2888 to provide public comment. And I will ask our city attorney to now announce what that item is.
Yeah, we actually have two items. One is a conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2. That's one potential case, Bill White sick leave. And the second closed session is conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D, one potential case, the California Voting Rights Act.
Thank you. And with that, I'll open up to public comment. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Go ahead and raise your hand on the webinar or press *9 on the phone. Luke, do we have any members of the public on the phone wishing to speak?
We do not.
All right. I'm seeing no one in the webinar, so I will now close public comment. We will recess to closed session, and we will, if there is any reportable action, we will report out at our next meeting on February 8th. And with that, we will all be leaving this webinar and going into closed session. And to the members of the public that were here this evening, we thank you for being a part of our meeting, and we'll see you next time. Good night.